Welcome to the Mental Health Merienda, your snack-sized guide to mental health wellness. I'm Dr. Adeline Leon, licensed clinical psychologist specializing in neuropsychology.
And I'm Michelle Young, licensed clinical social worker.
And if you get the sense that it's much harder to make friends as an adult than it was when you were in grade school, high school, or college, you're definitely not alone. In this episode, we'll be discussing the reasons why it's so hard to make friends during adulthood and how you could use social psychology to help.
And I think this is something that we can definitely speak to from a personal experience. So not only do we manage this Mental Health Merienda channel together, but Adeline and I have actually been friends for well around 18 years, maybe a little over. And what's interesting about our friendship is that we've maintained a long distance friendship for a majority of those 18 years. So and even like when you think about that length of time, in that length of time, we've gone through many life changes, like going to grad school, you getting your doctorate, marriage, kids.
Cheers.
Mhm.
A lot of life changes.
Right, definitely. And we went through life changes all like at different times. So I think that's what's really like interesting about our friendship too. So we'll definitely speak to that.
Yeah, we'll definitely incorporate a few examples of that from our own friendship. So, at least in American society, romantic relationships are often perceived to be much more important than platonic relationships. And of course, romance is a very meaningful part of life. But psychological research shows that having stable, healthy friendships are crucial for our well being and longevity.
So, not only do strong social ties boost our immune system, but they also help to decrease the risk of contracting certain chronic illnesses. And it also helps increase the ability to deal with chronic pain. And all of this is according to a 2010 report in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior. So, friendships protect us in part by changing the way we respond to stress. So, blood pressure reactivity is lower when people talk to a supportive friend rather than a friend whom they feel ambivalent about. And I think that's really interesting that changes our heart rate and our blood pressure. And I can definitely agree to that. There's certain people that you just kind of feel it in your body, like you feel more comfortable around them. And then there's certain people, or maybe you feel a little bit more tense around. So I can definitely see that. And then in this study, participants who have a friend by their side while they're completing a rough task have less heart rate reactivity than those who are working alone. So again, like having their mere presence next to you, I think changes our biology, which I think is really interesting.
I think it's really interesting, and especially this other research that we found. Scientists studying friendships, they found that there are similar brain activities amongst the friends in regions responsible for a range of functions, including motivation, reward, identity, and sensory processing. So when Wheatley and her colleagues collected fMRI data, so that's looking at different neural imaging images of your brain where they can actually see the activity in your brain. And so they looked at that data on people in a social network. They saw that the closer friends had similar brain activity when watching a series of video clips, and that's from a study in 2018. And actually, they have another study. It may have already been published since we read this, but a more recent study that was in the process of being published, where they could tell based on brain activities between people who was actually, or they can actually predict who would become friends based on whose brain activity levels were most similar, which is fascinating.
That's really fascinating. I think too, it's almost like, there's certain people that you just click with more so than others. And it's like you can actually see that in people's brains, like who people are going to click with. That's how I interpret it, at least.
Yeah, me too. It's like there's something biological behind that clicking with someone feeling. And so I think we speak about that spark that you have with someone in a romantic relationship, but there is also a version of that spark and that clicking in platonic relationships.
Yeah. Now that we've established the benefits of friendship, it's also helpful to understand why is it so hard to maintain our friendships into adulthood. So there is research by a sociologist by the name of Dr. Rebecca G. Adams, and she's a professor at the University of North Carolina. So, according to her research, people tend to meet their lifelong friends in college. And that's because you are meeting three conditions that are crucial to making close friends. So, those three conditions would be proximity. The second would be repeated, unplanned interactions. And then the third is a setting that encourages people to let their guard down and confide in each other. So, as we're listing these three conditions, you can kind of see how, as you get older, and if you're trying to make new friends into an older, like adulthood, that meeting those three criteria is especially hard the older we get.
Definitely.
So, yeah. So, proximity is difficult into adulthood because we are so busy, and we're also increasingly isolated from one another. I know for you and I, we live in different states in the United States.
On
So,
opposite sides of the country.
right. So proximity is not a factor for us. We live far away from each other. And that's what happens into adulthood, right? So you might move because of career or going to grad school, or maybe you move because you are going to, marry someone, and you might be moving to, maybe another location where they have to move. So, young adults, we're settling into our careers. We mentioned earlier, there's a prioritization of romantic relationships over platonic friendships. And so as we get older, our social circles shrink. And then sometimes friendship takes a back seat, unfortunately. So the next thing that we mentioned earlier was unplanned interactions. So again, that's another key factor. So that's also really hard as we're getting older, because we tend to become really busy. So as we get older, we have other responsibilities. We have our family, we have our careers, and then if some of us have children, that eats up a lot of our time. I can speak for myself. I feel like all my weekends are pretty much taken up with my children's schedule. So it's really hard for adults to kind of have unplanned, interactions. I think, if you want to make a plan with me, you have to do it like a week in advance. I can't do it like the day of, or like that the same evening. Like, it's just, unfortunately, like my life isn't built that way.
Yeah, like even for myself, we don't have kids, but it's hard for my husband and I to have unplanned, spontaneous interactions with people because we already made dinner plans. Oh, we already have something that's, defrosted, and we're going to make that for dinner. And then if one person goes out, then the other person will, what will I do for dinner? So it's things like that. I used to do that before I got married all the time, and it wasn't really anything. But now it's, we have other people to consider, and other people, family, and that those obligations, they tend to take priority.
Yeah. And then the third thing that we mentioned earlier was having a setting that encourages you to let your guard down. That's really hard to find, especially, as you get older and trying to find a new person. So, privacy is really hard to find. If you think about the majority of the time adults are spending, it's usually in the workplace, right? So if some of us are, working in an office, so you're spending time with people, there's proximity. However, in terms of getting to know them and letting your guard down, that's kind of awkward in some like office settings, because, you might want to tell someone and open up to them. But then like if you work like in a cubicle setting, other people are going to hear. So, that whole like being in a setting where you're able to let your guard down and be vulnerable, offices or the workspace might not necessarily be conducive to that. And I can't really think of other spaces. And if you work from home, then you might not, have a lot of interaction with other, other adults. So having that setting, I think, is something that isn't available to many adults anymore.
Yeah, I think too, even aside, I think the work setting example is a really good one. But if you have a kind of a social group where it's, just maybe 5, 6, 7 people that all spend time together, and it's always that group, then I think a lot of people can relate to this, where I guess you have those friends, maybe they're acquaintances, maybe they're somewhat friends, but you can have these people that you spend time with quite a bit. But if you never spend more private one-on-one time with any of them, you could end up not really forming any significant and very meaningful friendships from that.
Right, right. And then again, you bring in the other factors like, proximity, and then the time, you might have that one or two people that you can do that with, but then trying to get schedules together so that you can actually like make that moments happen gets really hard.
It is hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when we think about these, how do we overcome these obstacles? There's a psychologist and friendship expert, Dr. Marissa Franco, and she wrote a book on this. It's called Platonic: How the Science of Attachment Can Help You Make and Keep Friends. So she definitely knows a lot about the topic. And she has 7 tips that can help with forming new friendships in adulthood. First one is to change your scripts, which that means that don't necessarily feel like you have to follow along with what you've been told. And so when it comes to friendships, what we mentioned earlier, and that at least in American society, romantic relationships, there's more value put on that. And so if you change that script in your mind, then that can really help with valuing your friendships more. I think related to that, just recognizing that friendship does not necessarily happen organically. I think that can be really hard because if you have a lot of friends, let's say from high school or college, where maybe a lot of those did happen organically because you had those three factors that we mentioned earlier with the proximity and unplanned interactions and privacy. If you don't have that anymore, then it's even more important to be more intentional about meeting friends. And so it could be, there's a lot of options. It could be joining a meetup group, which they have quite a few of those throughout the country. Uh, Bumble, which is the dating app, now has a friend option. I think it's called Bumble BFF, where it's the same as finding a partner, except that you're looking for friends, for potential friends. And then there's also quite a few social groups on Facebook, and so it could be a social group, yeah, based on like a shared interest, or even just a social group of people who all want to meet new people, and then forming friendships that way.
Yeah, I think the Facebook social groups are also helpful, especially if you've moved to a new location. Because what I've seen, at least, I can speak for myself. There are groups where, like, if you went to a college and maybe not everyone lives in a certain city, then there's like some sort of like Facebook social group where everyone can like meet up and maybe like go to a local bar or a local restaurant to kind of meet up with all these other displaced people. Yeah,
And you have something
um,
in common. So you have a
exactly.
starting
And
point.
yeah. And I think too, what you said earlier is super important that, friendship doesn't necessarily happen organically. Cause I think that's a misconception where like things are supposed to be like effortless. And I think with any relationship, there is, effort that you do need to put into it.
So, the second tip that Dr. Franco has for making new friendships in adulthood is to expect that failed attempts will happen. And so, I think this is very much related to changing your scripts. Once you have gotten to a point where you change that mental script where, oh, friendships should happen organically, and once you've accepted that, that's okay, I will put some more effort into this and actually be more intentional about it. Just know that not every friendship you attempt will succeed. It's not something to take personally. Sometimes the other person may be busy, or maybe it's just, it could be more dedicated to work or children, or maybe they have things going on, whatever it might be. Or maybe you just don't click as friends, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So
The
I think
brain
that really helps.
activity isn't
Mhm.
matching up.
Yeah, exactly. The fMRI data is not a match. And so, number three is to assume that people like you. And a positive mindset, it really matters in trying to make friends. And so a few social psychology theories that really play into this. There's the risk regulation theory, which is that we decide how much to invest in a relationship based on how likely we think we are to get rejected. So it's kind of a way to guard ourselves and our feelings. There's the liking gap, which is the idea that when strangers interact, they're more liked by the other person than they assume. Then there's the acceptance prophecy, which is that when people assume that others like them, they become warmer, friendlier, and more open. And so it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's a really important one. So the fourth tip that we have is to participate in activities where you'll have more exposure to the same people. So think of it, if you are really into reading, then joining a book club versus going to a book reading. So in the book club example, you're participating in an activity where you're going to be exposed to the same people in that book club until the book ends, versus the book reading where it's like a one-time thing and then you leave and then you're never going to see those people again. So those activities where you'll have more exposure to people. And then that social psychology theory that kind of plays into this is the mere exposure effect. So we have a tendency to like people more when we see them more often and they're familiar to us. So again, kind of with that book club, you're going to see the same people in the book club, and you're going to be more familiar with them, and that's going to then breed that, like liking them more, and vice versa, them liking you more as well. So in addition to the book club example, some other examples that would, could help foster this would be, joining a workout class. I know, Adeline, you like are in a yoga class. So that's, a way that you can see some of this similar people that have a similar interest with you often. And then I also think of like adult sports teams. So pickleball is very popular, and you and I have a mutual friend who plays like soccer and joined the soccer club. So again, like you're kind of putting yourself in a situation where you're exposed to certain people who have similar interests with you, and you're seeing them over a length of time.
And actually, we have covered this subject in another episode before. But what I also really like about that is that you're also engaging in something that you enjoy. And so again, going back to our mutual friend, she really enjoys playing soccer. She's been playing soccer for a really long time. It's just something she enjoys. But in addition to that, it's also another social outlet where she can meet people and then also be exposed to the same people over and over again and form those bonds.
Yeah, definitely. And then a fifth tip that we have is to show people, as you're meeting people and you do like them, show them that you actually like them. So we tend to like people who we believe like us. And, that makes sense. Kind of when you're talking about some of the social psychology concepts you mentioned earlier, Adeline. So actually, the quality that people most appreciate in a friend is something called ego support. So what that basically means is that we like someone who makes us feel like we matter, right? So when you show people that you like them, that you enjoy their company, it's showing them that you matter to them and that you're interested in them. And so the more you can show people that you like them, that you value their time, the better. And even something as small as just texting someone. So people sometimes think, oh, I haven't talked to this person in a while. If I send them a text, it's kind of random. But just that small gesture of texting a friend is actually more meaningful than we realize, because that small gesture does show that person that we're thinking about them, we value them, and it fosters that relationship. And again, that whole ego support of, oh, that this person cares about me. I matter to them.
Yeah, and I think it takes a level of vulnerability to do that, because I think what a lot of people can say, and I'll admit I've been guilty of saying this many times, where, oh, well, they haven't texted me. Why should I text them? Why should I be the first one? Well, someone has to be the first one. Exactly. And so I think it's a matter of putting your guard down just a bit, and then not really trying to read too much into it. And just, if you'd like to talk to them, if you're thinking of them, just reach out. And if they respond, just know that generally people really do tend to feel like that's very meaningful.
Right, right. And then another tip that we have is commit to a community. So friendship isn't just about, one-on-one relationships. It could also entail, something that you can do as part of a group, maybe doing something that, again, we were talking about shared interests earlier. So feeling good about being part of a bigger community. So, there's traditional communities. So think like neighborhoods, workplaces, where you work, or places of worship. So if some people who are religious might be part of like a church group. Those are more common communities, but we can also have kind of create our own communities, right? So if you have a shared interest that requires volunteering, I think we've kind of mentioned volunteering in our loneliness video, is, volunteering is a great way to meet new people. You're spending time with the same people like over a course of time. And then you're also joining a community of people who also, believe in the same cause. So I think volunteering is a great way to meet new people and to make friends. And then, any other kind of like group activity where, again, you're kind of joining a bigger community, and then you have that opportunity to spend more time with other people. And then the last tip that we have is to give yourself some grace. If you think,
That's an important one.
yeah, definitely an important one. And ones I think we have to also for ourselves remember, right? Yeah. So give yourself grace, because again, like if you think it's hard to make friends as an adult, I mean, this is a common problem as we've been saying this whole time. The data shows that so many people are lacking for community, and it's nothing to be ashamed about. Again, we've mentioned earlier, there is an epidemic of loneliness in several countries around the world. It's a known societal issue. And, in the past, communities used to be built in, right? It wasn't so much that we had to seek out these communities, and now it's shifted. We kind of live in a time where we do have to kind of seek out these other communities. So again, give yourself grace. It's not easy, and I think a lot of people are struggling with trying to make friends.
Yeah, it's a widespread problem. And so when it comes to our current relationships, we already know, as we said earlier, that the stronger that they are, the more likely we are to thrive. And so based on Dr. Franco's research, here are 7 ways to foster your existing relationships, your existing friendships. Number 1 is to shower them with platonic affection. And so we think of affection oftentimes in romantic relationships, but affection is more than just holding hands and kissing. It's about communicating love and appreciation, which provides a layer of security in the friendship. And so it shows your friend that you genuinely care for them and that it lets them know it's safe to invest in your friendship. So again, a lot of what we're talking about here is kind of a bit of a guarding your feelings and trying to be a bit more open about that. And I think that can really help foster your relationships, and in addition to meeting new friends. So, number two is to spill your struggles, joys, and guilty pleasures. So, for example, if you really enjoy watching reality TV, maybe you're someone who's known as being very intellectual, and that's not something people would normally expect from you, and you share that with a friend, and it's something that you can connect on, then you have that thing that you can share. It does involve some vulnerability. And so, again, going back to what I've mentioned a couple of times, where if you are showing them this vulnerability, then asking for that validation and support. And that's normally what we get from our friends. We tend to think that people will be more judgmental than they are. And so, let's say that you have someone, maybe you want to foster this friendship, but maybe it's a newer friendship, and I don't know, I don't want to share my guilty pleasures with them. I'm not ready to be that vulnerable yet. Then maybe you can share something positive that's happened in your life. If you got a promotion, if you got a good grade on a test, if you're in school, then those could still be some places where your friend can validate you and you can strengthen that bond.
Right, right. And we talked about earlier, like those three key things that kind of help cultivate friendships. And this is kind of like a way to cultivate that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So a third thing that we recommend is clear communication. So with our friends, again, being very clear about our boundaries, clearly communicating our needs, our emotions. We can't expect our friends, even though we've known them for a long time, we can't expect them to just like know what we want or to read our minds. So, having that communication with our friends and maintaining it is really important. And then we've mentioned this earlier, but people sometimes don't see friendship as something that you have to work towards. Again, people assume that it happens organically, that it's lighthearted, but conflict does arise in any relationship. So with your friends, it's really important to foster that healthy, constructive communication, and being able to deal with conflict and work through that strengthens the friendship, strengthens the relationship, and it also shows that you can be authentic. Because again, we're not always going to be happy. We're not always going to, it's not always going to be sunny and wonderful. So, making sure that we kind of work through any like miscommunication, any like, negative feelings is really important in fostering our friendships and making them stronger.
And so I think that lack of communication that oftentimes we can have in friendships is something that contributes to friendships fizzling out sometimes in adulthood. And so if you compare it to a romantic relationship, for example, it would be unusual to just suddenly stop talking to someone that you've been dating for 2 years.
Yeah, that would be weird.
That would be a little weird. You would have that breakup conversation, as hard as it is. But in friendships, you don't tend to have those kind of conversations as much because a lot of friends don't have these open communication channels. And so you might have someone, for example, maybe they've been making some comments that have really bothered you. Maybe you have gained some weight and they've made some comments about that and you don't say anything because again, you want to just keep up the niceness of the relationship. You don't want the friendship to kind of sour, but then what can end up happening is that tends to build and then that's what can lead to some friendships just fizzling out.
Right, right. And that's what we want to prevent, right? Especially if this is a person that you feel like warmly towards, someone that's important to you, you want to make sure to maintain the friendship as we're talking about now. So that's how communication is so important because again, like if there are things left unsaid and you're making assumptions about, how a person might be treating you, that is like a road to like ending a friendship, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fourth tip is actively work to keep the relationship alive. So kind of we talked about how like romantic relationships, how many times is it said that you have to keep the relationship alive, especially if you've been married for a long time? Same thing with friendships. So again, I guess we keep saying this, but friendships do take effort, and it takes effort on both sides. Again, it's not like this effortless endeavor. All relationships, take a certain amount of effort. And so as much as possible, again, especially if this is someone that you truly do care about and who is, an important person in your life, be generous as much as you can, and not just, monetarily, but be generous with your time, and your resources with them. So that is an easy way to nurture your friendships, especially according to what Dr. Franco has said in her research. This is one that I would love. So if you happen to be someone who's great with children, offering to, babysit for your friend who has kids, I would love that.
Many parents, I think, would love that. Yes, please.
Yes, please do. Come over right now. And then another big one to help, again, keep that relationship alive is to be there for those major life events. So, Adeline, like you got married, not too long ago. And again, we talked about, our long distance friendship, but definitely made it out there for your wedding and for all the, the wedding festivities. Because again, like you're important to me. So of course I'm going to make that effort to maintain our friendship.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And you were a maid of honor at my wedding, and your wedding speech, which I very much appreciated, that it was in English and in Spanish, which you are not fluent in Spanish.
I'm not fluent in Spanish. Let's not. But I am. I'm not.
I really, really appreciated that. I love that.
Yeah. And, you've come out to LA, especially when I've had like my kids and, they were younger and it was harder for me to travel. You coming out here was something I always really appreciated. And again, just us taking the time to meet up on like, different trips, different girls trips that we try to maintain. So all of those things I think are really important. Mm-hmm. So another tip that we have is to examine your busyness. So trying to banish that I'm too busy mindset. So when you tell people, and again, in America, a lot of us are busy and we have a lot of things going on. But when you keep telling people that you're too busy to see them, you're too busy to talk, you're too busy to hang out, it kind of just feels like you're constantly blowing them off. And I can, I've been on the receiving end of that, thinking like, oh, okay, this person clearly doesn't value my time or friendship. So, and even though you might not intend to come off that way, that's how it does come off to the other person. So a couple things that you can do. So if you are busy, and again, I think a lot of us are, and we kind of talked about why this is so hard to maintain and make friends because of busyness. But if you are busy, I think what helps is to communicate a little bit more clearly and be more specific. So for example, if it's like a busy week because you have a deadline for work, or maybe your kids have, some events going on, then kind of being clear about that. So, this week's not a good week, but how about next week? Or how about in 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, my schedule will free up. Or, kind of just at least like relaying to the other person, like, kind of the specificity of what's going on. And then also offering a counter offer, right? So I'm busy this weekend, but maybe next weekend I'll be free. That's something that kind of shows that you're still being intentional about trying to make time for other people.
And I think part of that too, with what you mentioned with being clear and concise, is that so going back to that example, if you have a deadline for work, then communicating that and saying, oh, actually, I have this big work project, and I have this deadline coming up on this day, so I won't be able to spend time together, on this week, but maybe the next week. And not only does that counter offer show the person that I really value your friendship, I really want to spend time with you, I just can't right now. Also, by being more communicative about the reason for it, to the extent that you're comfortable sharing that, it also helps with that bond. It helps, again, privacy with that, sharing something a little more vulnerable, because that can even open up the communication channels a bit. So even if you can't see each other in person, the other person might say, oh, wow, yeah, that sounds really stressful. I actually had a work project similar to that. I can give you some of my notes, for example. I can give you this. And then again, even though you're not able to spend that time right at that moment to see each other, you're still fostering that friendship.
Yeah. I think what's happened like over the years for me as a parent, like sometimes I'm busy and I'm maybe just like not feeling great because, I'm feeling overwhelmed with being a parent, among other, like juggling other things. And then when I like open up and tell someone that, and they're like, can I help you? It's even coming over and like maybe we don't have to go to a restaurant or go out, but just coming over to my house, and that's how we spend time. That's also something that's, I appreciate personally.
Yeah. And so number 6 is to start with small but meaningful gestures, and embrace the power of the casual check-in. It's more more meaningful than you think. So calling, texting, emailing a friend just to say hello, that's something you can do. It can be especially meaningful to follow up with a friend after something important. And so if, let's say, you've talked to someone and they mention, oh, I know they're in school, I have a final coming up on Monday. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's, I hope that goes well. But then texting the person Monday evening or Tuesday, oh, how did your final go? Oh, how was the test? How was everything? And it's showing that you're keeping up with them, and that, again, that ego support is showing them that they matter. I'm thinking about you, and I'm thinking about, I wonder how that went for this person.
Yeah. You're paying attention to like their whatever it is that they shared with you, and you're paying attention and you're following up, and again, like showing that you care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then celebrating small victories or bright spots in their day. So I think that example that I gave, let's say you check in and their test went very well. So you celebrate that. And so that's all related to that. And then acknowledging efforts. And so let's say that you're on the other side of that friendship, where you might have a friend who's reaching out to you and trying to spend more time and you just haven't been able to, then acknowledging their efforts so that they don't feel like it's unnoticed. Right. I don't think any one of us ever want to feel like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then number 7 is to cultivate routines. So see friends for weekly, monthly, or annual get-togethers, just depending on your circumstances. And so, Michelle, I think you mentioned earlier about us, the fact that we live in different states makes that very difficult, but we make an effort to plan a yearly trip, at least once a year, to see each other. I went to a conference earlier this year. I knew it would be in California. And so I let you know and another friend, and we made a trip out of it. I still went to my conference, and then I went and spent time with you at your home too. And so things like that, where sure, we're busy. I'm busy. I had that conference that I had to go to, but I made sure to incorporate you and our other friend into that trip. And that shows that I value your friendships.
Yeah, definitely. And us kind of like rearranging our schedules to like make it all work. I mean, again, it works. It's both sides, right? It's not a one-sided endeavor. Both people have to make that effort. So that's all that we have for today's episode. I'm Michelle Young, licensed clinical social worker.
And I'm Dr. Adeline Leon, licensed clinical psychologist. And if you liked our show on maintaining and improving adult friendships and would like to see more content like this from us, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channels so you can get notifications when we release our weekly episodes. And we would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you felt that it's been more difficult to meet friends as an adult? And have you ever tried any of the recommendations that we mentioned? Have you ever tried meetup groups or Bumble or whatever it might be? Definitely let us know in the comments below. We would love to hear from you.
And thanks so much for tuning in to the Mental Health Merienda, your snack-sized guide to mental wellness. So we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.